My name is Brian Donovan, and I live in Highland Park and work for a group called the Cooperation Group. I'm new to Michigan, so might you think that I'm presenting about the Detroit budget and the Michigan State budget, but I do have experience lobbying at the state and local level. And I just took my first small gig lobbying the Michigan legislature on behalf of some student housing co-ops in the state. And so I have just been relearning how everything works compared to what it was in my previous experience in the state of Texas with the city of Austin. When Kate mentioned that she needed somebody for this, I said, I've just been boning up on how everything works in the state of Michigan, and also Detroit, because even though I'm living in Highland Park, I think Detroit is the big influence, and has tremendous opportunity, and it's a lot of political activity that's happening in Detroit now. And what I'm intending to talk about is the Michigan state budget, including the process for that budget. And there's a handout that is the fiscal report for the last completed budget, which is the 2016 budget. We'll look at that a little bit to get an idea of the kind of how the money is spent, where the money comes from, and then how those decisions about the appropriations work through that process. Then we'll look at the City of Detroit budget. There's also a handout. It's the short and shiny version that is put out by the mayor and the mayor pro tem on City Council. We'll talk about the process for the City of Detroit budget, where that money is coming from and where it goes. And then we'll look at development incentives. Both the state and the city use development incentives to try to bring jobs to the state and the city. We'll also look at debt, bonds, and how and why a government might use debt to take advantage of opportunities to spend money now that they haven't earned yet. And we'll also look at some specific debt vehicles. We'll look at bonds, tax increment financing, as well as tax abatements, which is not debt per se, it's just giving up future revenue that would be going back. And we'll look at the mechanisms for how those are distributed in Detroit. Particularly the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, but they're not the only way that incentives might be given out. And I want to talk also about community benefits agreements. There was a very controversial two proposals on the last election ballot, the more moderate version won, but I think it's important to understand how community benefits agreements work as well going forward. And that there's no, even though there's an ordinance now, they're all worked out one at a time. And it's a very high profile one that's just announced, although I don't think it's final yet, around the Gordie Howe Bridge landing area in southwest Detroit. So, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but how does that sound for an agenda?
Sounds good to me. Do you have a copy of the city's capital too?
The city's budget?
Right.
Yes, I have the budget in brief, and then I don't have a PowerPoint, but what I want to do is show you how I looked all this stuff up so that you can actually pull it up, not just in a piece of paper, but on the internet to be able to see what future budgets look like. And I'll tell you when to look for things, because the process usually happens about the same time each year, or the process is iterative every year. There's the announcement by the mayor or the governor, and then it starts to go through the sausage making process, and then it comes out the other side, and when to look for the audit on the back end to see how the city or the state actually did compared to what they said they were going to do. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the state budget, and we've got a handout here. It's just one that's this page deliberately left blank. That's the first page. This is actually part of a document that's about 100 pages. But what I printed out is the auditor's analysis of the performance of the state in the 2016 budget period. And then this single page was because the PDF was so badly constructed that I had to cut 3 pieces of paper out and tape them together to be able to see where the revenue comes from the state with the numbers next to the indicators. So this document, this management discussion and analysis, that's the auditor's analysis of the state budget. And this actually is the back page of that, but I had to assemble it because the PDF looked terrible. So the state budget is on a fiscal year of October to September, which is the same as the federal government. So the 2016 budget started actually in October of 2015 and ended in September of 2016. And that's what this analysis is based on. This is called the CAFR. And I'm going to open it. Let's see.
The city's cap is on this map.
So I just looked for Michigan CAFR 2016, and you can see it's the comprehensive annual financial report. I believe that is going to be the correct one. Yeah, that gives me the whole catalog of them. This is the most recent one. And this is what we have pages printed out from. And you can see it's 316 pages long. It's a large document. And it has analysis down to the department level of how everyone did compared to budget. I started printing on page 21, which is management discussion and analysis of the Auditors Report. And you get a financial statement of what's happening at the state, as well as how all the money was spent. Oh, actually, here's a nice org chart. You can see the citizens of Michigan are right on top. Remember that. This government is your government, which is why they have to put all this stuff up on the web. It's not a simple thing to find. If you just go to the governor's website, the budget analysis isn't just gonna leap out at you, but if you look at that certified annual financial report for the budget, then you'll be able to get these documents. Okay, so I printed this out so that you can have the auditor's opinion on how the state did. I thought that was a good takeaway. But what I want to highlight in particular are where the money came from. And you can see here that 39% is from grants. So who is giving a grant to the state? Federal government. So the federal government is providing 40% of this budget. And the 2016 budget was $52 million. The 2017 budget was approved at $55 billion. So it is a lot of money, and almost 40% of that is coming from the federal government. And a lot of that is going right out through Medicare payments, or there's block grants that are coming in for rural areas. Block grants for the city of Detroit would come through the city of Detroit, and but the rural areas, it comes to the state, and then the state can decide how to allocate those funds. And then there's you can see there's general taxes. They divide taxes into two categories, which gives slightly less than 50% of the total budget. But general taxes and taxes restricted for education. And then you have charges for services. So if you have a business, you have to pay every year to keep the business updated. That's a fee, that would be a charge. And then taxes restricted for transportation. There was another ballot initiative just when I arrived in Michigan where there was going to be an additional sales tax to be able to fund road repair. That would have been contributing to this category had it passed, but it did not pass. And then you have a couple of other small things, capital grants and miscellaneous. But this is where the pool, that's $52 billion, so that is a lot of money. And this page that I pieced together, just a single page, that actually has a breakdown of this, of the tax revenue. It includes, so basically this section is here. And the biggest chunk of it is income tax. $7.3 billion in income tax in the state of Michigan. The next biggest one is the sales and use tax, which is $3.28 billion. And that's in this general category. Then in the taxes for education, sales and use is the lion's share. That's about $6 billion. And the income tax is about 2.6. And there's also property tax. Even though that's collected at the local level, some of that is rolling up to the state and getting distributed out to schools. Yeah.
The road repair taxes, are they voted on just by the House of Representatives and the Senate?
Yes.
They're not put to the vote,
The
to the
only
voters,
reason-
to the citizens for regular elections?
No, I think taxes can just be passed through the committees and then by the House and the Senate and signed by the governor. The reason that the governor put that on the ballot because the legislature did not support that effort. And he thought, look, we need more money to be able to actually bring the roads up to speed. And the legislature said, no, we didn't. And the governor thought the people would be on his side and got that put on the ballot. It did not turn out that that was the case. So normally taxes would just be passed through the legislature and would go into effect, would not have to go to a vote of the people. But that is a possibility. Either the legislature or the governor could put something on the ballot for a vote if they decided that's how the people should have the final say. Okay, now the spending. Most of the money, 65% of the money is going to health, and if you include health and human services, it's actually 75% of the money at the state is going to health and human services and education. That is mostly because it's required. All the Medicare money, they don't get to divert that to something else. That's all coming from the federal government. It all has to be spent on healthcare. The state, the human services that are provided, that would include things like unemployment, workers' comp, and the education, those taxes are all dedicated for education, so they cannot be diverted. These percentages have been going up in recent years because of a combination of the federal government contributing more money to the states. That's actually part of Obamacare, so the federal government is putting more money towards getting more people covered. And the state has been cutting spending on everything they can cut spending on in the other 25% chunk of the wedge. And a lot of this money is spent on staff. The agencies themselves have a lot of people working there, not 50 to I don't know the exact number for how much is on staff, but a lot of that is people. And a lot of them are, you know, union members working in Lansing or around the state that are getting paid to execute all the programs that the state provides. I will point out that this revenue sharing and tax credits, that right there, and I was looking to see if there was one called jobs, but those are mostly going towards incentives. So the revenue sharing is like a tax recapture. So as an incentive to a group to come in and create jobs, they might get 20% of the state income tax back as a rebate. Well, that would be revenue sharing. So the state is giving up that money to convince that company to come here, and those new workers, some of that money that they pay in income tax goes back to the employer. And tax credits are a similar thing, except in that case, the tax would just not be charged. Sometimes there might be a sales tax rebate, but that would be considered a revenue sharing. Otherwise, it could be a property tax discount, or it could be an income tax discount.
Why was the incentive removed for the movie industry?
You know, I don't necessarily know the answer to that question. Does anybody else have any thoughts on why the incentives were removed from the movie industry?
I mean, I know when I was working in government, at the time, I think it was like, what, 2011, I want to say? I think the general consensus was, like, the outside was that it just wasn't a good deal. They just weren't, like, I mean, the tax breaks that we were getting, that were coming back, you know, suitable enough investment, you know, back to us.
What about all the people that were going?
They just felt that wasn't, and again, like, I wasn't involved in too many of the details, but I just didn't feel like even those employment numbers were worth the tax breaks that we were given. And I think a lot of times we can find that with like casinos and other things, the tax breaks that we give them aren't necessarily worth what we were giving them in tax dollars in regards to employment. So that's kind of, that was the general story was. That's not like, that's not my opinion or anything, that's what I just, general story.
I'd say something on opinion, having worked around the industry, and a number of those filmmakers receiving tax credits did bring in people from both the East and the West Coast quite often. And most of that was because they needed the names to draw people to the offerings that they were given. If they didn't have, shall we say, known names in the movie, it wouldn't be classified as it was to receive viewing, and thereby enough revenue to actually have something going on.
Any other thoughts on that? And I'm happy to, if there are questions I'm not able to answer, I'm happy to have whoever can answer them. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a response to the question that gets asked.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In Livonia, it's my understanding that Amazon is placing a distribution center there to be open, and that the city of Livonia, if I understand this correctly, is not charging them property taxes for 12 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would be a tax abatement. It's common, and certainly a company like Amazon, and really a lot of large investor-owned companies, they shop around for the best deal that they can get for where they're going to locate.
And I guess the incentive for the city is that they're gonna have about 1,000 employees, during holiday time, maybe 1,500 employees.
If the city has, for the city share of income tax, it's gonna help them, and I guess they're hoping that would be able to make it up. And it's also, you know, it's difficult to say what it's worth to have Amazon in your location, but Amazon is one of the most highly capitalized corporations in the world, and they move around a lot. they had a big fight with the state of Texas when I was there, where they were arguing that there should be no sales tax because it's all getting shipped in. It's just internet sales. But once they had a distribution center that they put in Texas, the state comptroller said, look, you're operating in the state. Everything you ship in is taxable. And Amazon ended up settling. But it went all the way to the state Supreme Court before Amazon settled. They tried to get it to squash it. So Amazon is going to take maximum advantage, and Livonia is effectively lying down in the most seductive posture to get them to come there. And they will be making money on the income tax, but you can be sure that, and that of course doesn't impact Amazon, but Amazon wants to operate with the lowest costs they could possibly do.
Thank you.
Have you ever heard of a proposal at the federal level to outlaw targeted tax breaks, abatements, and other things like that at a state and municipal level to prevent this kind of deal?
Not directly, but I do think that it's funny, but the people who are really promoting benefits for very large corporations, when they were not in control in Washington, it was all about local control. And then as they became more in control in different states and at the federal level, then you start seeing this consolidation. It's like, well, if we can just choke it off in one place for the whole country, then that's going to be the way that we can best assist these investors who own these publicly traded companies. So I have not heard that directly, but I have observed that occur in Texas, where it was very much about local control and incentives for these things. School districts themselves saying, okay, this is worth bringing this company in. To now the state is saying, particularly to the city of Austin, but really San Antonio and other cities that have their own mind about what they want to do with incentive money, that they are attempting to overrule some of those agreements that were made.
The reason I'm asking is because I don't know what Livonia was expecting to get. You know, the benefits, you talked about income tax. I'm not aware that Livonia is one of the cities that actually has an income tax, so their employees might be there, they might be buying lunch or something.
They do not,
Right.
Livonia does not have a city income tax.
Right, so I don't know what kind of nonsense that is pitched to the local officials when they say, you're gonna make money on this, trust me. 12 years of abatement, you're gonna make money. If it turns out that they don't, and some other abatements they get are not just like prospective, they may get something right up front and then they move in a couple of years. Does anybody ever insert any kind of a clawback agreement or any other kind of?
I've definitely seen that happen. And there's more detail than just getting them to locate there. It may be that they're believing that when Amazon locates in this particular location, the value of the property surrounding that and the overall value of property in Livonia will go up. But it could also be that they put in some specific requirements, like 50% of the hiring will be people who live in Livonia now, to try to address unemployment issues, or those kinds of constraints can be written in. And when they are, there's usually some evaluation process, and where there's a failure in the evaluation, there can be a clawback. Now, probably Amazon is not going to get into an agreement where there could be a clawback. But that isn't to say that that might not be the best deal, and they actually will feel like they will fulfill all the terms of it, and they're going to go for it.
I see that on the pie chart that you have on the screen, revenue sharing appears on the expenses pie chart, but doesn't appear on the revenues pie chart. Do you know how this works? Is the government cutting checks to other parties that they're sharing revenues with?
I think that the taxes would be paid as usual. So it is on the revenue chart, but it would just be a regular tax, right? And it's either a general tax or a school dedicated tax. And then that money goes back to municipality or to, usually it would be to a city. So that there are incentives for revitalizing downtowns all over Michigan. So if a city has a program they're doing in downtown, and then there would be sales tax getting paid to the state, maybe some of that comes back to the city to help fund improved sidewalks or kind of street trees,
I know
whatever.
normally there's a formula where the state capture a portion of the sales tax for a municipality or a county, then it's usually returned back to the municipality or the county. That all is equated with the revenue sharing.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the revenue sharing when it was given back. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the budget process for the state. Let's see, I'll go back to Google. So there is a state budget office that works with the governor to put the budget together. And this was where I had downloaded I downloaded also these projected budgets. The governor's required to announce in February what the governor's intended budget would be for the state the following year. And it needs to get passed obviously by October.
I'm sorry, on the expenses chart, the education, with public schools closing down in the city of Detroit, what type of education are they spending on?
It's
so
still
expensive.
it's still K through 12. Let me see if I've got it up. Let's see, if we look at, I want this one. If we look at the 2018 executive budget, so this is the budget that was announced by the governor in February, or I think it was at the end of January, actually. It has to be within 30 days of the convening of the legislature. He's got a chart in here about K through 12 spending statewide. Let me just see if I can do. Come on, it is, charts are used to convey impressions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it easily here. But it is a very much up and to the right chart. So it's saying that over time, K through 12, the spending is going up, 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 and they're spending more and more on schools all the time. And the number, it's true, the total amount that's being spent on schools is going up. And the bailout of Detroit Public Schools actually contributed to that increase in recent years, right? Because the state is paying off a chunk of that debt. It happens to be debt that the emergency manager took on.
I didn't realize that it was statewide, the schools that they're investing in, because they're putting like computer systems and more technical advanced, things in the school for students to learn a different way, but they're closing Detroit public schools. And these kids don't have any access to easy education that the other students have in other parts of Michigan. So they're investing in places that already have technical advancements rather than making them here in the city.
I'm sure that there would be a good dance that would be done by the education department about how they're attempting to have quality education in schools in Detroit. I'm not going to say that is their goal. I don't know that I can say that they really are maliciously attempting to keep children from learning, but it looks that way to me.
It's not fair when you live in the neighborhoods that have these public schools.
Yeah, and it's charters, and they create this separate charter district for all the new schools. It's really been, the more that I read about that, the more it really did look like it was a targeted attack on children in Detroit.
Oh, just as a point of information, we have in here with us the former president of the Detroit School Board.
I know he looked familiar. I kept saying,
Well, do you have any response, or would you like to make a comment about the?
We need a response.
when you take away art, music, science, and technology, you're headed to apartheid.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's it.
It actually started back with England. It actually started back with England doing it, and it just kept snowballing and taking money from the city and the students.
Yeah, it wasn't just Snyder. It seems to be a tradition for over a decade, maybe 15 years now. Okay, so are we good to talk about the process, or?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see, here we are, the budget process. So the state budget office, this guy here, he's actually appointed by the governor. The rest of the staff here, and let me see, there's an org chart here I want to show you. I think it's, what is that? Maybe not. Careers, come work for us. Well, maybe I'm not going to find it. We'll go back to the budget process. But there are dozens of people who work under this fellow. There's maybe 50 people in this department. And there are representatives who work in all of the departments. And the budget process for the state starts with the department saying, this is how much money we need to be able to do the work that you're asking me to do, Mr. Governor. And that's actually more than a year ahead of the budget going into effect. That usually starts around August, and the budget starts in a year from that October. And then, so that information is all collected up through this budget office and communicated with the governor. So usually, that the appointed leader of the state budget office is a cabinet member of the governor, and works with the governor in those initial years to be able to make the announcement that happens at the end of January with the budget. So the first thing is you have department requests, and then you have the first revenue estimating conference. So one of the challenges of making a budget for the state is that you don't know how much you're going to collect in taxes. It's based on how many taxable transactions happen for sales tax, how much income is made, how many tax abatements there might be. But there is a concerted effort to predict as accurately as possible how much money is going to come in.
That would also be the mega tax credits that the businesses also want to cash whenever they want to during, 30 years that they were offered.
I'm not familiar with
As far
them.
as the variable nature of revenue and what's not there.
Well, they would be working with the departments to determine how much each department need. They would also be attempting to talk to anyone that might have a voucher to be able to get a big refund, to see if they're intending to do it in the next year, to try to get as accurate a number as possible for what that income will be. And this is true of any government entity. It's not a simple thing to know how much is coming in. And there's going to be another revenue. This is almost a year before the budget starts. They're doing this estimate. So there's a lot that can happen before that, before the year actually begins. Then the governor starts making decisions about how much each department is going to get and what the overall budget is going to be. That's usually over the holidays, December and January, and then by the end of January, the governor has to make an announcement that is the budget. And that's what, let's see, I have another window here. Not that one. No. Okay, so the announcement of the budget is the governor saying this is how much we're going to spend and this is how we're going to spend it. Now that does not determine what the budget's going to be. The legislature actually sets aside the amount of money for each department and for, it's called the appropriation process. And once the governor puts their budget out, then the legislature kicks in. And there's many categories of spending that are in the budget. And usually half of them start in the House appropriations and half of them start in the Senate. And just to keep things appearing fair, usually what starts in the House and Senate changes every year. So that if last year this appropriation for education started in the House, next year it's going to start in the Senate. And once that's where the more intense public hearings are in the state budget. Those are done now, but in the spring, that's when those debates are happening. And you have to look closely. The public, I was actually watching Rashida Tlaib's presentation from last time, so I know that they only have to give 18 hours notice before when there's going to be a committee hearing, even if it's an appropriations committee hearing. So you have to be vigilant if you want to be able to get there and have your voice be heard around particular budget items. And usually just in the House or the Senate, wherever it starts, that's where the more extensive hearings are. Once the appropriations proposal comes out of that committee, it goes over to the other House where they don't usually have robust public comment. There's still an opportunity to have a comment, but they don't spend as much time getting input from the public. And at the end of the day, all of the different appropriations bills for all the different departments and areas of spending that would be coming forth there would be a proposal from each House, and then there would be a conference committee on each of those appropriations, where the only thing that would be discussed would be the differences. It's possible that both the House and the Senate pass exactly the same appropriation for a particular topic. But when they don't, then there's a conference committee where there'll be members from the House and the Senate that will sit down together and work out the differences and come up with what the final proposal will be. That is pretty much opaque. So that work you do not get to go have public input on. Once that comes out, then it goes to the floor of each body for approval. Then once it's approved and the appropriations bills are approved in both the House and the Senate, that would go to the governor. The governor in Michigan actually has the ability to do a line item veto. So do you know what I mean by line item veto? So they can just pick a particular piece of funding and say, yeah, the whole budget's going to pass except that. And it takes a 2/3 vote of the legislature to turn those around. So the governor has a lot of influence, because if he just had a veto power, it would be a lot of pressure on him if he vetoed the whole budget, like he's holding the state hostage. However, if he's just going to cut out this $20 million that would be for Detroit Public Schools or whatever he decided should be cut, then the state carries right on, and that money is just not going to be allocated. Now,
Excuse me.
yeah.
Is there a quote on how many lines he can veto?
He can veto any section of any bill, only in appropriations. So if it's a law, if it's a bill that's changing the law about property tax or something like that, he can't just say, I don't like this clause. This is only for appropriation, so this is for spending. Now there's one other piece. Even once the governor has signed the budget, which I think they just agreed on the $55 billion budget, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe that hasn't come to the governor yet, but it's almost, the process is nearly done now to go into effect in October. But before that happens, there's one more revision, because just because the money was appropriated doesn't mean it has to be spent. So the governor can, or the agencies working under the governor's command, can choose to not spend the money, particularly if it looks like the income isn't going to come in to support it. But the governor, in some ways, through the agency leaders, gets to decide who's going to have to suffer the shortfall. So it isn't necessarily evenly spread over all the state agencies. But there's ongoing, it becomes increasingly clear how much money you're going to end the year with at the state level, the more that you're through the year. So usually there's less spending at the start of the year, and obviously salaries don't surge or what have you, but at the end of the fiscal year, there might be some gravy to spread around for different departments. But you can't go over the appropriation amount. But usually there'll be a certain amount of withholding from all the agencies or most of the agencies, and then the last money would be released at the end of the year. And then if you look back at this, which is the handout about the state budget, on page, I think it's towards the front, that you get the net worth of the state. It's on page 25. So it says change in net position for fiscal year ending September 30th, 2016. So this is actually a profit and loss statement for the state. Sounds a little funny to say, but so it has all the revenues, and then it has all the expenses, and this is in millions. And then if you look at the total primary government here, which is the second to last column in 2016, there was $1.5 billion increase in net value in 2016, which means there was almost $1.6 billion not spent that was brought in, and it increased the total net value for the state to $17.1 billion. So the state is presently sitting on $17.1 billion in assets. Now that's not all cash. A lot of that is land or other non-liquid things. But I think there's one other one that actually has it broken out on what the assets are. It's on the back page, page 28. So here you can see that these are the capital assets that the state has. And you can see it's more than $17.1 billion. If you look at this total primary government again, this 2016, it's $23.4 billion the state has in capital assets. And that is not cash, right? This is all depreciating things or land.
What is included in the unrestricted, there's an $11 billion adjustment?
Where is that?
Page 24.
Page 24, yeah, above the last item for grand total. What is the difference between restricted and unrestricted?
Sorry, I'm still looking for.
In that position.
Oh, I see, unrestricted investment and interest earnings. That is the 4.8, is that right?
It, for 2016, it totals, 11 billion. It appears to be an adjustment.
That's a negative.
Right, it's an offsetting adjustment.
All right, I'm looking on page 25, that'll be why I can't tell. Okay, very good. I got it now. So I think that what that means, I suspect what that means is that would be, if you remember the pie chart on the taxes, you had general taxes and you had restricted taxes for education or transportation. So those could be a change in the amount of receivables for those things. For instance, let's say at the end of 2015, there was a receivable of $15 billion. And then, and that counted as asset, right? Because that's money due to be paid to the state. Well, then at the end of 2016, there might only be $4 billion in outstanding. And that would be a net change of $11 billion, of negative $11 billion to the amount of asset. Does that make sense?
Book adjustment, basically.
Yeah. It isn't just receivables, but I think the fact that you have restricted and unrestricted, those are the things that are restricted or not. The general fund is not restricted. That can get allocated however you want, but there are restricted funds, there's restricted taxes. And this would be a change in that outstanding value. Does that make sense? The state, it's a big business. $11 billion change in receivable. Okay, so I do want to go back to the back page and just look at the total capital value, and you can see what the state is actually holding in terms of depreciable assets. There's $23.4 billion total. Most of that is infrastructure, $14.6 billion in infrastructure. I suspect that's state highways, whatever the value, the undepreciated amount of that is. But they also have land, which would be like rights of ways for the state highways. They have land rights, buildings and improvements, equipment, computer software. That must be some valuable computer software. I've never been in a business that we depreciated the computer software.
Depreciating software.
Yeah.
It's hardware that's depreciating.
I'm telling you, $310 million. $310 million of depreciating software. But infrastructure is the big one. Two-thirds of it is infrastructure. And they also have construction in progress here, where they have a partial asset. But so you can see what the state is holding. And remember, the net worth is only 17.1, so obviously they've got some debt that is reducing what the net worth is. These could be payables, short-term payables, or it could be bond financing or other things like that. Okay, are there any other questions about the state or the state process? And we can switch to Detroit.
Good.
Okay, let's do it. I think the ability, one thing that is true is it is easier to influence the closer you are to the people who are making the decisions in government. So at a city level, you're going to be more able to influence what's happening than at a state level. That's not to discourage you from going for fixing things at the state. I'm trying to do a small thing now. We'll see how that goes. But I think with the city, I think you have a more direct ability to make a difference. Okay, so let's see.
You got a question down there?
Okay.
Yeah, I guess my question could apply both to the city and state. I was wondering, why was, revenue sharing cut off around 700 Grant Home, and what, has it been resuscitated? And if so, if not, what is in its place? And what I've never understood is why it was cut off in the first place, because it seemed like the main reason the city is in so much debt is because the revenue sharing was cut off. And then, so there was a lot of money that was still owed the city that they never got. So what I want to know is, why was it cut off in the first place? And if so, is there anything in this place that is actually making up for that, and is it actually helping?
Can anybody offer a response for that?
Oh, I can. Historically, the city, revenue sharing is cut like other municipalities to help the state balance its budget. So like if the state has a unanticipated higher debt than they thought they would, they normally adjust the revenue sharing to all the municipalities, especially if we're doing it to the city of Detroit.
And is that what happened in 2007 when she was just saying specifically?
Well, especially in 2007, 2008, when the real estate popped, there was less revenue going to the state, and and the city of Detroit started getting less, even though they had an agreement that they were supposed to be getting more.
Yeah.
I used to work for the city too.
Thank you.
Annually, you can actually request to have your property taxes reassessed, which would reduce the amount of revenue coming through from property all across the city. So as the conditions in our neighborhoods were declining every year, property owners could go in and petition to have their taxes reduced. Many did not.
I did.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have something they want to add, or they can add to that? Because I actually don't know.
Actually, the state changed how they funded cities and so forth, they reduced the amount. That's how come everybody, all the cities was asking the state to give them their money back, because it went from, you get a set amount and then you get another based on a percentage, and they reduced that percentage, and it affected Detroit disproportionately to everybody.
So it was actually a change in the way the funding
change
worked,
in the
period,
funding.
not just revenue sharing
Right.
for particular programs, but just the amount passed through the cities was reduced, period.
Right, yes, it was for all cities, not just Detroit, but because of Detroit's largeness, that's what the.
And the timing, if it was 2007, the property tax, in 2008, the property taxes all started going down at the same time. I'm sure that was.
In fact, state revenue dropped.
That's what I was talking about, the state.
So this is the handout that we're going to go over for Detroit. It's a very short 5-page handout, but online there is a lot more information. Let's see. So in the city of Detroit, there's a 4-year plan that is put forward. And the budget is only appropriated for the current year, or actually for the upcoming year, is what I really mean. And the city is not on the same fiscal calendar as the state. The city is on a July to June budget. So the budget just kicked off this month for the city of Detroit. The 2018 budget, I think it is. The last one that is audited, let's see, I think I actually saw that in the free press, but I think they have the audit up here. I'll look for that in a minute. But so the process that the Detroit budget goes through, the mayor proposes the budget. This is on page 2 of 5 in the handout. It's this little circle here. There's still an office of the budget that's working with the mayor. They're talking to the departments about how much they're going to need to be able to do the work that they need to do. And the mayor then puts out the proposed budget, and actually it's a 4-year plan. And there's a budget overview. It's broken down by department, and then the legal budget. And these are all clickable, so you can go in and look at these documents. And so you have a breakdown of what the actual was for the last completed year. This is the budget that was passed. This is the recommended budget for 17-18. This is now what just kicked in. So they do not have the adopted budget, but presumably there is an adopted budget because we're operating in July, but it's not up on the website yet.
Their capital usually don't come out until March. Their capital information don't usually come out until like March.
Of actually what is the budget? That's a little slow. Surely okay, so the process, let's go back to the process. So then once the mayor announces the budget plan, then it goes to city council, and there's an appropriations process that the city council goes through to allocate money based on the mayor's budget. So again, the mayor doesn't get to set the budget. City council sets the budget, but the mayor makes the recommendation. City council can change those numbers around, and that's the budget that is passed. And if it takes until March, I would think, and I have to say I did not follow
It doesn't take the March, it's March before they have all the paperwork in.
That's where they have it up on the website.
Right.
Does the financial advisory firm get it back?
What was it?
Oh.
Now the chief financial officer is responsible for all of that. Everything, the money goes through his office. He gets paid more than the mayor.
Like the financial advisory board is from, they're appointees by the state of Michigan.
That's a separate entity.
Oh, well, now that's the last, I'll come back to your question in 1 second, but that's the last, this financial review commission, is that what you're talking about?
Right.
So that is like that's like the independent auditor type of position, although it's really a public auditor position to review that
That's
what
a
occurred
bankruptcy.
is recorded correctly. And yeah, that's imposed consequent to the grand bargain or emergency management. Once a city goes into emergency management or any government entity, then there's a period of time where there's a reviewer that's going to look at every year to see that things were booked correctly and that progress is being made that would eventually mean that that entity would be able to be free again.
So it'll go dormant if the city of Detroit has a balanced budget for 3 years.
All right. That's a lot better than Highland Park.
I said it'll go dormant if the city of Detroit has a balanced budget for 3 years. But that still does not preclude it from coming back into full activity. If the budget has a shortfall.
Okay.
When was the last time?
Based on the mayor's budget, does it matter that it's all the money or the budget seems to be invested in one small area as compared to the larger parts of Detroit? Because if you go to the deep east and deep west, they don't have any amenities. They don't even know what a real grocery store is. So does it matter that it's all the money's being invested in one area?
That I think that I guarantee you it was not presented that way.
Oh, okay. Well, how was it presented? Because, there is no blueprint based on the improvement over the years of the whole city of Detroit. It's only in one area.
Well, I think that that is certainly, the mayor has been focused on downtown and then spreading up the Woodward corridor and increasing population in those areas. And the population hasn't increased in the city of Detroit. It still has been going down, but that's been his goal, is to help make that happen. I don't feel like I'm qualified to be able to say, although I certainly can observe what you're saying is true. But for instance, with police or emergency services, that's one department. And if everybody happens to be downtown, that's just how the chief is doing it.
Well, it doesn't seem like, the residents, the true Detroiters live downtown. I mean, it just seems like people from suburbs get to work downtown and benefit from the city's improvement, but the residents don't have anything. They don't even have schools. So how can we make the city better in a real perspective rather than building rail systems in an area that already has everything?
Well, I think that the most direct way to get involved would be through your city council person. And through the mayor now has a dedicated person for each city council district. Gang up on them. I mean, you want to turn out in numbers and tell them, you're not satisfied with how things are going. And the more specific you can be, the more likely you can change that. I would like to open that question up to the rest of the people, because I don't feel like I'm really in a position to answer that as well as some of you, perhaps.
So the budgeting process is done by departments present their budget to council one by one. And there's a list of days that'll come out in around March. If you get in touch with your city councilor or either of the at-large members, they will have, especially Brenda Jones, they will have Brenda Jones.
Yes.
Yeah. So they will give you the calendar of when the departments are scheduled to come present. And then each counselor basically files lists of questions to those departments saying, can you break it out because each department gives a presentation. And then there's a big bulk called non-departmental that includes things like the Land Bank Authority and the Building Authority and the Economic Growth Corporation. They file questions and they say, why are you spending money this way? How are you spending it? How much is going to staff? How much is going to consultants, et cetera? And then they often try to change the budget. And they have pretty limited latitude in how much they can force it to change, but there are ways that they can force it to change. And something that you might notice as you follow it is that departments don't return answers to questions until the very last moment, or things like, and they catch things, like the Office of the Chief Financial Officer tried to have a single appropriation this year. As in, here is my budget, I need X number of millions of dollars, and City Council has a set of advisors that they work with, and they were like, hey, what are you actually going to spend this on? So those things come up through the process, but it's through that process, which takes months. They do months of hearings, and they basically work from like 9 in the morning until 2 p.m., and then they break, and then they work from 2 until 5. In pretty much the month of March. I study land, I'm a researcher, so I study budgeting.
Any other comments?
I think the sad part too is that for downtown, there's so many quasi-governmental agencies like the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation and the Business Improvement District, which is run by Big Business, and there's just everything that if you try to do anything or try to question anything, all those agencies are controlling where the money goes. And most of the people who are on those boards are not Detroiters. Some of them don't even own businesses in the city. They're the pals of whatever mayor is around or whoever's doing the appointing and stuff. But that's where so many of the tax dollars go to do things like the campus marshes entity or whatever it is was totally done by private businesses. And it wasn't really the city, it was a private group that came in, but they got the land from the city and the control. So I think that's the hardest part is we're all being shortchanged everywhere, short-sheeted almost. Where everything sort of gets pulled out and you think you have control and can participate, but they found chamber conferences and all the other things. So it's really, good business handling it all. You know, Dan Gilbert's the one who funded the, M1. And, you know, and that's not really where we needed transportation. Just my opinion. Been here a long time.
Does anyone else want to make an additional comment?
Well, so it doesn't seem as though there's a department by department breakdown of how the funds are allocated. It's readily available online. So
That is correct. That's what I meant by that's not how it's presented.
no user-friendly way to just say, as an ordinary citizen, like, this is where DES, this is where, Department of Public Safety, or the police, or DDOT, this is how they're spending their money. Geographically, this is where they're spending their money. And is there any impetus for anything like that? Is there anything like that at the state level as a corollary to that? I mean, we have the departmental breakdown, but if there's an asymmetry in where the funding is being spent at the state level, is there demonstration of that as to where geographically those budget outlays are being weighted across?
So I think at the state level, since the state started having representative government, there have been districts. And there have been people that represented those districts and who have been held accountable to those districts. So there is a tradition of reporting what the money is getting spent in your district to them. In Detroit, the district system has only just started. And so there's not a tradition of breaking it up by district, but that you should go to your council member and get them to push for that. And frankly, there should be, I mean, it doesn't matter how big a city you are, you can be the federal government, there should be an element of transparency, right? So this little 5-pager is not enough, right? And it is obvious if you look at how the spending is being done in the city, that the roads downtown are great. The infrastructure downtown, the water, the sewer, it's all highly functioning. You know, they're building high rises. Think about how much extra sewage is coming from those high rises that are being added there. Well, it's not bubbling up into the street because they're fixing all that infrastructure. Well, they're not fixing the infrastructure in the neighborhoods. And frankly, there isn't the money to do that, and how are they going to pick one over another? But the city council members are representing districts, right? So that is how to push for that transparency. And it's going to take time. I mean, the state has been operating for 150 years with districts, and so they're still not terribly transparent about how that works. But they're more transparent than the city today.
Well, I guess that's kind of my thought, is that a well-represented, well-spoken representative can target their role in representing government and say, this is what I provided for this district, this is where your government dollars came from, but there's no actual sort of just administrative mean breakdown of like, this is where raw data, finances were spent across the state.
Okay, so there is actually I think a representative could get that data about how much money was spent in their district, even though it isn't on the web. And the reality is that's harder for the reps in Detroit because their districts look like spiral octopi. Right? How can you say how much was spent in a district that curls around, you know, but anyway, and at the federal government level too, the Congress can tell you what got spent. The congressperson can tell you what got spent in their district. And it's because it's been that way. And those district lines move. But the people doing the reporting, the financial spending are, you know, they adjust for that when those lines come in. It might take a year when the lines get redrawn, but they're able to tell you. And that should be happening in Detroit. And it's reasonable that it takes time because it costs money to change how you report the data. Make no mistake about that. And it's money that I'm sure the mayor doesn't feel like spending money to make sure that every representative on council knows exactly how much was spent in their district is not his highest priority right now. But if there was public pressure for that, particularly with the election coming up, you could certainly move the needle in that direction.
And now my question. That being the case, how can you do an accurate audit? How can you audit it and then say, the city is bankrupt if it's so, lacking in transparency and no one can give you a straight answer? How do you come in and say the city is bankrupt? How can you do an accurate audit?
There is one. It took a year, but the last year, the audit for the last year, actually I don't think that's even true. I think it's the audit for the 15-16 budget is now available. When I was looking for it, I couldn't find the one for last year. I thought, it's a year since that budget ended, but there wasn't the public release of the comments like what I downloaded for the state. But there was the one from the year before, and it came out in July of the year after. So it was like 11 months after the end of the year, you get a report. But it's a citywide audit. It's not a by district. It's just the total dollars spent, total dollars coming in. And the kind of interim numbers that were announced by the CFO for last year was a $51 million surplus. So I know you were sneaking in the question about when was the last balanced budget, but I didn't let you ask it. But last year, or this year that just ended in June, at the end of June, was $51 million surplus. Now that's not audited. We probably won't see a final number for a year, but that there was a surplus this last year. And it was also in the black the year before. So it's 2 years in a row now of not having a deficit. So if it only takes 3 years of not having a deficit before you don't have that state review, then the city's about to be, have that burden lifted of the state reviewing. But I think just as the state is saying, we're going to look at your numbers, the people actually have the power to say, we're going to look at your numbers. So it could be possible for city council to pass an ordinance saying that there will still have to be an audit, and that it should be an audit to the council and the people of what happened, and it should be by district.
They're still required to do a capital report anyway.
But a capital report is different than how much money was spent in each district, for instance.
You mentioned it being an election year. I'm curious for you to elaborate on how to use this knowledge of financial records and finance on a city level to impact the election. Or how do we, and what are some of the things in an election year? Not just it is an election year, but how do we use this information? Like, what are some key ways to use the information? I want you to elaborate on that a little more.
Well, you can be sure that the mayor is going to be touting the couple of years of balanced budget, that the spending has been reined in, and that projects have, a lot of new construction projects have occurred, infrastructure upgrades in downtown, New Center. And we'll have all the numbers to back it up. But the questions, first of all, paying attention to the numbers enables you to ask questions in a way that can demand numbers in response. So I think demonstrating that you're watching the overall performance of the city is important. And I think that there's a lot of people running for mayor. But I think it's important to ask them what their priorities are actually going to be. And if transparency isn't one of them, ask why not. Because ultimately, the ability to see what happens, and I can tell you that Detroit is opaque, just like those conference committee workouts that happen at the state level. That it is difficult to tell what's happening in government. Now, I'm not going to all the city council meetings. I think if you do, you can know more than what I know. But the ability to see in kind of the public record of what's going on is very challenging. And certainly compared to Austin, where I was coming from, the budget, there was like 8 months of public hearings and comments about the budget. It wasn't quite participatory budgeting, where there, like a group of people that showed up could say how certain money was going to get spent. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask for too. The city doesn't have to carve out 20% of the budget for the people to decide, but they could give a little bit to every district and let them decide what they want to do with it. And it helps people practice having the dialogue about these challenges, because there's a lot of challenges and it's hard to prioritize, what are the most important things to address. And it helps if you can actually have a real debate and impact at the end of it. But I think asking for participatory budgeting, asking candidates for mayor about transparency, anytime it's a strong mayor system, there's going to be an interest in keeping things from being too open. Because every decision is judged. Every decision is judged. I mean, just like you were saying, all the money is going downtown. And if you live on the west side, or the east side for that matter, what do you have? Your potholes in the road, your sewer lines need work, there's fire hydrants don't have enough water pressure.
Residents can't even benefit from the prominent universities that are actually in the city. It's outsiders that get to come here and take the education around.
It's true, they're like.
We have nobody to be investing back in our system.
I've certainly observed that from around here, and I think that's partly why New Center was picked for an area for investment, because it was already still hanging in there in a better way, and plus the university invested in some infrastructure around here too.
Question, how do you force the state to do a forensic audit that has been requested of $2.1 billion that has been misappropriated in school aid fund?
Well, that's probably lawyer up and take them to court. Because it's very difficult to push the state on something like that, because they can just say, well, it wasn't misappropriated, or we just decided to do it differently, or whatever they might say. But I think that, again, that's going to cost money, and it isn't going to be the priority of the governor to spend that money, to spend new money on figuring out what happened to old money, unless they have to.
You take it to Court of Claims, is that where?
I would say that's this is actually another issue with the state of Michigan, is that they've exempted themselves from Freedom of Information Act, which would be your normal course of action for demanding records of this kind of nature.
See, the problem is there's still two boards of education. There's an old code and a new code. Old code is paying off that $2.1 billion over the next 30 years of our property tax monies that should not have been misappropriated. And we have data that shows that much of it was misappropriated, but getting that to court is what you're saying is the problem.
It's hard to get the evidence, and then I think that the state has exempted themselves from civil lawsuits too. I think unless you're naming an individual, it's difficult to say that it would be the Department of Education at the state level.
We're naming the governor, because your property taxes for the next 30 years is that money that they have wasted, have spent, misappropriated, and they don't care. And most people don't know that as you pay your property taxes, that school aid money that's going is paying that money that they spent already.
So actually, that's one of the things I'm going to talk about, is how governments use debt, the city or the state, And in that case, it was bonds, right?
Bonds, that's
They
right.
took those future taxes and said, well, we will say that value will be X over the next 30 years, or whatever period of time they decided, maybe 40 even. And we will take this much cash for it, and that amount of cash now, plus the interest that would be paid on them over the life of the bonds, means that you can spend that money now. And a lot of new schools got built that are now part of this other district from that financing that was done from the original DPS bond issue. So that was a very short version of debt instruments for cities, but I just wanted to mention that that's a topic that I wanted to
Can a
talk
ballot
about.
issue force them to do it? Because the money that you're paying in your property taxes are going to pay off debt that should not have been there. So the property tax owners of Detroit should be able to have a ballot issue to force the state to have a forensic audit.
So I am not familiar enough with the initiative process in Michigan.
It's my understanding that the state can reject a ballot referendum for any appropriations bill. When they tried to initiate a referendum on, I think, the right to work, the House just amended an appropriations that make sure that the referendum is unconstitutional.
What I said is that I didn't understand how initiative worked in Michigan, where there could be a petition that would get something on the ballot. And what he's saying is anything related to appropriations, so money, the spending of money, or allocating of money, they can just reject any ballot measure.
Okay, but when you put it on the ballot and the citizens approve it, then the citizens can put their money into escrow until such a time as the state does a forensic audit.
I think that who funds the audit would be the question. I think that would put pressure on the state to do it if the money was sitting around and they weren't going to have to spend it.
Because the banks, once you start putting your money into escrow and the money is not going to pay down the debt, the banks are gonna force the state.
Oh, you mean put the property tax revenue into
taxes,
escrow?
right, into escrow.
That is a fine idea.
Well, and this is why you need attorneys, because that would be quickly going to a judge, and very good arguments would need to be made to protect that escrow reservation.
Like we don't have any representation.
I certainly am not in a position to be able to comment about that, because technically there is representation, but it,
Good representation.
yeah. Before, I want to talk about development incentives and also like tax increment financing, tax abatements, which we have talked about a little bit already, and community benefits agreements. And really, a lot of that is coming out of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, which is multiple organizations, like what you were saying. It's like a agglomeration of multiple organizations. But this Detroit Economic Growth Corporation was started in 1978 by, why can't I say his name? The mayor.
Coleman Young.
Yes, Coleman Young, thank you. That was a bad tip of the tongue, and his son is running now. Anyway, Coleman Young started the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation to consolidate and streamline for the kind of bringing businesses in, because the city, it was too much bureaucracy in the city. It was slowing things down. It was putting Detroit at a competitive disadvantage to try to bring in new businesses. And that over the history of Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, At that time, it was pretty much the mayor's agency for being able to do these things when Coleman Young was there. But over the last 10 or 12 years, it's become more independent, working at an arm's length from the mayor, and more independently deciding on kind of how these monies should be invested. And the income or the money that comes in to Detroit Economic Growth Corporation are tax captures, like the incentive to improve the downtown that the state offers, that's a partial sales tax recapture. That's coming back in for them to be able to do. And there's also tax increment financing that has given funds for them to give out. Now, what the way that works is there would be a certain area, maybe could be as big as 100 blocks, that would be designated as an area that's going to increase in value, and over a period of time, let's say 30 years. And so just as the property tax revenue over 30 years the idea is that would go up. And so whatever amount that would be estimated to go up, that would, you could take that increase over the 30 years and borrow money against it. That's what tax increment financing is. So the tax increment is how much the property tax will go up over a period of time. And it allows a city to sell bonds for as much money as the interest and principal of that property tax increase can pay for. And that happened, that there's multiple areas around that happened with the new hockey stadium arena is a tax increment finance. And there's multiple other ones in the city where there were bonds sold on sales tax increases. So the baseline, property tax increases. The baseline value of the property at the time of the initial project, that continues to roll into the city coffers in a normal way. But then the increase amount over time, once the stadium is built and other amenities go in, and presumably that property tax goes up, that's going to pay off the bonds. And the cash from that borrowed money is going into Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and a lot of which went right back to the people building the stadium. I mean, I think it was like 50% paid for by citizens of Detroit.
Isn't this the same issue, that the ballot issue that's being talked about now, putting on the ballot about that $36 million that's DEG is going to try and give to Red Wings Stadium?
Yes, that is the example I was talking about, is the tax increment financing.
$450 million.
There was extra money
Right.
beyond the tax increment financing that they're giving in just straight up abatement. Abatement is just a discount.
So we'll be voting on that this November, right?
I don't know about that. There's been talk about that.
Signatures are being gathered now, and what I understand is they have enough signatures now, so it's going to be on the November ballot.
So I think that's the same point that was being made about appropriations. An initiative about money doesn't have to be actually put on the ballot. Now maybe it will be, but I think the state could stop that from happening.
They could stop it by stopping what they're trying to do there.
Well, they could do that too if they weren't giving away the extra money. Now, I would just, go ahead.
Do you have any dollars in school funds as well?
Yes, because property tax revenue, a certain proportion of property tax revenue is dedicated for education. And that's the dedicated, actually those are sales tax that's dedicated at the state level. But the property tax money all stays local, and most of it goes to schools. It also funds the city operations.
And the library.
None of that money goes to small business, it's all big business
Well, that's not true. If you look at their website, let's just quickly look at their website. Let's see. No, I'm joking, but there is a small amount of money that goes to small business. Like there isn't even small business on here. It is. Well, like biz to biz match. It's something like, what is it? $500,000 a year or something like that goes out to help small businesses expand. And there's another one too that they just announced. Actually, I think it's in the newsroom. That's where I saw it. Let's see. Let's see what they got on that. There's another one that's called Motor City Restore. So this is also for small businesses to improve their storefronts. It's even smaller than Motor City Match, but and now where I came from in Austin, I was part of a group called Livable City, which is a nonprofit citizen advocacy group, and we put out a study back in 2002 showing that locally owned businesses actually return 35% more to the local economy because the money is not going out to, let's say if it's Amazon, to Jeff Bezos or to investors that are all over the country, all over the world in fact, and instead the owners are in town and that money is recirculating in the local economy. Usually all the workers are from in town in the local business. And so the long-term benefit of having local businesses is substantial. It's a third better than bringing in outside, particularly chain stores, which are designed to take money out of the storefront in your town and take it to the investors who own the chain. So I think that argument could be made that this investing in small businesses should be a focus of this group. Now, presently the mayor has been more and more taking control back of the Detroit Community Growth, Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, which is why the fellow that was hired just kind of left in a huff when he was told that his contract wasn't going to be renewed, and it's still an interim person that's there today. So I think that there is an opportunity to influence this now in the election by pressing the candidates for mayor about their intentions for this. And I'll say that the idea of giving incentives for businesses there is merit to that. And there's individuals contributing cash to this organization. In fact, they list their donors. Let's see. Here we go, the cool contributor honor roll. So these are people, now, these are basically tax write-offs because this is a nonprofit corporation that's giving out this money. Their job is giving out this money to help businesses succeed in Detroit. And the people that are chipping in money are, some of these are nonprofits, so they're not getting any tax write-off. But certainly Chrysler, Comerica, Community Foundation.
The usual suspects.
These people all gave $10,000 or more. So
2008, they made lots of money.
Well, but now like LISC, they're a nonprofit, or Kresge Foundation, they're a nonprofit, but they're putting this money in because they want to support, business development. But there's no reason why that couldn't be more local business development that was being supported instead of millions of dollars for building a stadium downtown or moving the Pistons downtown.
So essentially, it's not the department heads of the Detroit cities. Essentially, it's not their fault why the city is in ruin. It's because everybody decided to build a stadium rather than schools or better homes or better living situations. Because I worked for AmeriCorps before, and I went in these homes and actually tried to do something good for them, And a lot of them are living in horrible conditions, lead paint, because the houses were built so old ago. And it's just not fair that they get to build a Little Caesars arena and say, hey, the city's improving. What are you talking about? I don't understand this phenomenon. And it is a phenomenon.
Yes, and it's certainly common. I think in general, governments at all levels have been catering more and more to large businesses. And the people that benefit from the large businesses are the investors that own them. So it is not everybody deciding that we should build a stadium. That's why there's a push to put something on the ballot.
Just the people investing the money saying, I want it to go this way.
Yeah, the
Right,
stockholders.
that's what I'm talking about, because MGM Grand alone can invest and make the whole city magically beautiful again. And you got all these well-established JP Morgan, Chase. I'm like, what are you talking about? We should be embarrassed.
They should be embarrassed. Let's embarrass them.
I think that having a coherent position that you can take to the mayoral candidates, because this is in control of whoever is mayor, right? Mayor, it is a strong mayor system in Detroit. So every agency, he's appointing the head, or she, if it's a woman, is appointing the head of, yeah, but it's more likely than it used to be. They would be appointing the head of those agencies that would be directing them how to behave, including the head of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. So, and actually I like the fellow who came from New Orleans. I met him at the Greater Detroit Chamber. He wanted to invest in the neighborhoods, and that may be why, he's not working for them anymore. But it's down to the mayor. So you want to talk to the candidates for mayor. Make sure the candidate for mayor that you're working with actually supports increasing how much is going to go to help small businesses or to help businesses in the neighborhoods, not just Dan Gilbert getting support to move Quicken Loans downtown. I mean, there's something to be said for that. I mean, it isn't that it is a bad mission that this group has. And even investing in big companies like Amazon, who came to Livonia, that's not a bad idea in and of itself, but it just should be in proportion with other investments that are supporting people that are already here, not bringing employees in from other parts of the state or other states or other countries. That often happens when you subsidize very large companies coming in. And I think that the fight over, I'm going to jump to community benefits just because I want to say a few things about that, and then we can have questions/discussion. And if you have questions about any of these topics, we can go back to them and see if we can answer them together. But community benefits agreements, again, I've seen a number of them get negotiated in detail. Not here; they were all in Austin, where I previously was, and Livable City actually put out a report about incentives or encouraging investing in small businesses. But a lot of the community benefits that you can get from a developer. So a developer is going to make a certain amount of profit or they're not going to do their development. And usually it's a lot. Right? If you're building a high-rise building, you're expecting to make a lot of money. And so the ability to ask for some amount of money to be spent on a particular project, maybe it's affordable housing, maybe it's weatherizing old houses. I mean, that seems to be a more appropriate thing to do than affordable housing in Detroit, is fixing up old houses that have good bones. That asking for that is something that is reasonable. And now there's an ordinance that has been passed. It wasn't the one that citizens put forth, but I think that that is another thing to talk to the mayoral candidates about, because it won't be city council that'll be negotiating those community benefits agreements. It's going to be the mayor. And frankly, it took a year of working out the details for this Gordie Howe Bridge Community Benefits Agreement for where the bridge is going to land in Southwest. And really, Southwest, they really get the short end of the stick on a regular basis. So it took a long time because they didn't even trust, even when the mayor and mayor's staff came down there to talk to them, they didn't even trust that it was going to come to be. So a lot of work had to go into just saying, no, we really mean to work something out. And it has happened now, and you have both sides actually saying they're pleased with it. So that is a good example. And I think that is something to learn the details about. Was anyone actually involved in that negotiation or know people who were involved in that CBA?
I know people, yeah.
So ask them what happened or how it worked. And
Having Canada as part of the process helped because they were concerned with what they would be a part of. It was less the case that the city was concerned with what they were doing.
So get Canada in the negotiations. Nevertheless, the city still had to sit down and work on that negotiation. So that could be a model. It's a lot of work, and I think one lesson, which I have seen in all the ones in Austin that have happened, is there's no template. There's nothing you can say, well, here's the benefit you need to give, and then that's going to make the people happy. It doesn't work that way. In different areas might want different things, and really over time, what a community is looking for changes. So I think it's got to be a custom agreement, one development at a time. And I know the city's been pushing for, in all these new residential developments that have happened in downtown, New Center, and Corktown, that some of those units be set aside as affordable. But the affordability is considered 80% median family income, which is really unaffordable for.
Median in the metropolitan area, but not the city of Detroit. Median in the metropolitan area is $56,000, and the city is $25,000.
Yeah.
Totally inappropriate looking at affordable housing scale on the wrong scale.
So that's a federal issue, because metropolitan statistical areas are what are used for setting these affordability standards. But you don't have to use the HUD standards when you're doing these community benefits agreements. You don't have to use them. That's why developers are saying, sure, we'll do that. We'll bring the 80% MFI person in from Oakland County, and they'll move right into our Corktown high-rise. And we still make a profit at those prices. 80% MFI is still a pretty profitable rent level. And we certainly saw a lot of that in Austin, where it's been booming. It's ridiculous how things have been going through the ceiling in Austin. There's not enough, even with all the profits and all the community benefits agreements, there's not enough money to buy the prices down for the people who are actually doing the work in the city, or cleaning the city, or even the city employees like firefighters or police can't afford to live in the city.
Attorneys are moving out of Oakland, California.
Yeah, attorneys are moving out of Oakland, California. Well, I think we're a long way from having those problems here, but I think the ability to direct some of this affluence that's coming from the redevelopment into specific benefits, that is there. And there is a model now that has occurred. Thankfully, Canada was at the table to be the referee. But even without Canada, I would say that the people that were involved in that negotiation can go back in with a certain expectation that a positive outcome can occur. And I think supporting that happening is really critical for any kind, especially if it's on city-owned land. And there's a lot of city-owned land right now. But the city has full control on what to demand from developers that are going to buy that land, especially if they're giving it away for cheap. So that is another thing to talk to your mayoral candidates about. And actually, you can talk to your city council reps about that, because they probably know what lots in their area, their district are with the land bank or that are owned by the city, or going through foreclosure process or exiting foreclosure process into nobody owns it. And those are the properties where there's the most control by the municipality. And they're desired. I mean, I think, I really like the idea of side lot sale. There's a lot of talk about that, although I haven't heard a lot of side lots actually being sold to the people who own the lot next door. But I think that kind of thing where that neighborhood level of development is going to be much more likely to look out for what the neighborhood people want than the big outside development. And I think pressing for community benefits and pressing for large public input processes for what those community benefits should be are a critical element for long-term success. And really making, this comeback or renaissance or rebirth, whatever it is that's going to be the word that you want to call it for what's happening in Detroit. But that benefit is all going to go to outsiders who have large capital to put in, unless the people that are here are able to organize and demand that those benefits come back to the people who are here and who stuck it out, which is right to me.
It seems like this mayor has installed these city managers so that he's listening to them more than he's listening to city council. So our best avenues to apply the pressure and demand accountability are actually at the manager level, that they're not reporting what the outlays within their district are. They are appointed and
By
they
the mayor.
actually should know what financing arrived in their district to handle the needs of the district that they're managing.
So I think I would like to restate what I heard you say.
Go ahead.
That the people who are assigned, like the agency heads appointed by the mayor, are not being accountable at a district level for what's happening.
Financially.
And yes, and they should be pressed to do that.
Yes.
I agree completely, and I think the mayor is the place to press on them, because they're not expecting to work through, another mayor coming in is not picking them.
And the next mayor may choose not to run with managers by district. So if we're grooming a public behavior that's managers by district, will it continue on? Or is this just
Well, I think that's
thing that a mayor did?
It's a question to ask. I mean, it led to a balanced budget. I think there's a certain inertia. It's hard, if things appear to be working, it is less likely that structure is just going to be broken up, because you're quickly getting the finger pointed at you for that, even if it's not relevant to why things started or stopped working. But I think you're correct about that. And I think it's appropriate for council to continue to push for financial reporting by district. And hopefully they are. I don't know that they are. I haven't heard any squealing like I would like to hear for that. But that's worth, they're also getting elected, so it's worth asking them about, that, getting that data. And I think that in a strong mayor system, it's the mayor. The mayor can change the character of the city quickly if they have the will to do it. So press the people that are running. And even if you can just get clarity from people who are not going to win for mayor, that makes those things an issue for the top candidates. That it won't just be, and frankly, I don't know a lot about any of the candidates, including Coleman Young, but he seems to be the most likely. He seems to be the most likely one in the final runoff. So I think it's worth pressing him for how he sees the long-term development of the city and how he sees investment of community benefits agreements and how money would be spent all around the city and not just on, the central corridor.
I have a couple questions about accessing information at the city level.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
Sure. So my first question is, in a lot of these development deals, they rely on the DEGC economic impact analysis to come to a conclusion on how much money they're really going to make. Is that information that is publicly available?
There is quite a bit of information available through the Detroit Chamber and also through, like if you look at this site selectors, we've got a cost of living calculator, tax rates, transportation and location, workforce and employment. So these are all data, this is all data about Detroit, different parts of Detroit. So this is all for really promoting. Let's see. I think
by development project, I mean.
So it's gonna be confidential by project, but the market analysis that they're doing for their project to see what rates they can charge, for instance, for square footage, for apartments or condos or whatever it might be, that data is more available. And the chamber, let me just go to the Detroit Regional Chamber.
Brian, I have another question.
Okay.
Do they do audits on the projects, particularly the CBA projects? So, there's a certain say there's a certain number of jobs or set of benefits that is supposed to come out of a project. Is there an audit that's done, after a certain time period so that we can, compare what was agreed upon to what actually happened?
Yes, usually it isn't an audit per se, but it would be a financial disclosure of whatever the project is. The first CBA here is the bridge that I know of, and so there's no precedent here.
I see.
There's also with the Meyer and neither
Which
of
Meyer?
the right one, right?
Oh.
And neither of them have held up to what they said that they would do, and have just kind of stopped disclosing information at a certain point. So although they're obligated to, and the city has the capacity to make sure that they do that, there is lax involvement there.
Who asked about the clawback clause before? Is it somebody who left? So there needs to be, if there's going to be terms put on to an agreement like that, there needs to be a specified penalty in the contract. If there's no specified penalty, there's no term.
Because my understanding is that a similar thing happened. Marathon was supposed to ensure that a certain amount of Detroit residents were given jobs, and I'm pretty sure that never happened.
It didn't happen.
And that was done several times, but nothing. There's no enforcement.
So but if there's a specific penalty named for the breach of the agreement, then that is pursued relatively easily. If there is no penalty named, it is very difficult to determine. I mean, when I was actually living in Los Angeles, this was in 1990, when a judge ruled that Firestone and Chevron and General Motors conspired to destroy the public transportation system in Los Angeles. and the penalty was $1. Because they couldn't determine what the damages would be. So unless there's a penalty, even when guilt is clear, the penalty needs to be agreed on by both parties, and then you can go get it when it's violated. And if there isn't one, and in that case, you know, it was symbolic. Everyone knew that it was true, and they hoped that there would be some kind of actual reparation paid. And the judge did agree that, you know, it was true, but there was no penalty. And that there was a lot of money spent on that case, you know, by both sides. So you want it to be a slam dunk. If there's going to be a benefits agreement, the penalty needs to be clear. That you do not have to spend a lot of time in court to get that exercise. You just need to demonstrate that it was not achieved, and the burden would be on the company that offered the benefit to prove that they did what they said they were going to do. And if they didn't, then they pay the penalty.
Excuse me, the gentleman's hands were
Oh,
up.
sorry about that.
It's okay. It's just to say that part of what the city lacks in this, in enforcing these agreements, is data that they don't work. So if you do have an allegation or, you know, proof that one didn't work, you would want to file a report with the Office of the Auditor General. I don't know where their office is, but you can find it online. If it is one that pertains to waste, fraud, or abuse in contracting, and that's like a much higher threshold, that would go to the Office of the Inspector General, which is also in the city government. And if it is just that you feel like the process was really bad, that would go to the Office of the Ombudsman, which is also part of, and those are all appointed positions.
With 10-year terms, right?
With 10-year terms, and they're appointed by city council. But council members often say, because they get the deals at the last minute. That's where if there is any public release of information that comes in the council, you know, packet, that you can get from the clerk's office. But that's at the very last minute. So when they might say, we hear that these things don't work, they lack data to show it. So you would want to get that data to the appropriate folks to make sure that it actually makes it into the minds of the folks who are charged with making this decision.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments about public finance or financing or?
I just had a question about, so currently the community benefits ordinance proposal B, I'm not sure if it like designates that there's any room for like when the developer doesn't do what they committed to do. It's just an agreement that they'll come together and agree on what they will do. I'm not sure if you know anything about that or.
Does anybody else know more about the proposal that passed? Yeah, I do not. Sorry to say.
A was better than B, and A wasn't that good.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief comment on how the whole, public officials accountable for finance or
Could you
saying.
speak a little
Oh,
louder?
sorry. Yeah, I just want to make a brief comment on how to make public, on how to hold public officials accountable for anything they do regarding the city, concerning financing and all that. Basically, contact your district rep, your city rep, your state representative, representative of Congress, email them, call them, especially since it's, elections coming up, they'll be more willing to listen to you because they'll need your votes, and they'll be probably reporting you anyway. So, go to libraries, schools, anywhere, to find the candidates, so you can talk directly to them about what you want them to do about these issues. The more you let them know what you want done, the more they'll be willing to listen to you, and maybe they'll actually do something about it. Keep in mind, these are public servants, and they work for you. Your taxes pay their salaries, so they're beholden to us anyway. So, that's a whole lot you can do right there.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I was unclear, about the evolution of the debt. evolution of the city and its living, conditions. So, so a department has that much control over people's lives to project a 30-year to 40-year debt payment plan that affects the other citizens of the residents of Detroit to have to pay back and are then get in return forced to live under certain conditions. So I'm not understanding that debt control.
Well, I think that if you're talking about a tax increment financing district, in theory, the amount of value of the property going up in that district should pay for the debt.
The increase in value, yes.
Yeah, the increase in value. However, if it doesn't, then everyone is sharing in paying off that debt.
So you're talking about the taxes that come from the increase in the value of the property. But the city gets the taxes, and then they can pay that debt with those taxes.
That's the idea, that they borrow just enough money to be covered by the increased value, the taxes on the increased value in the district.
You just left the taxes part out, so I wanted to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's, the property tax. Usually tax increment financing is about something is gonna happen that's gonna increase the value of this property over time, and we'll be able to borrow this much money now to spend, and we'll pay it off with that increased value. But then if it doesn't increase like it was predicted, and it's difficult to predict how property value is gonna go over 30 years, then everybody in the city is on the hook for covering that interest on the debt. And the principal, interest and principal on the bonds.
And sports stadiums have a long record now. It's been shown that the return on investment is much lower than a lot of other projects. Not a great investment.
You'd see developers doing the investments if it really had high returns.
Right.
What is your name?
Oh, Brian Donovan.
I just had a question on millages and how those are appropriated. Because in the Pistons deal that just went through for the $35 million, I think it was the money taken was out of millages for the Detroit public school system and for I think the Wayne County Park system. And I think what had happened was during the paying off the debt of DPS last year and the whole legislative process behind that. The millages taken that was supposed to be for the school system were taken to pay off old debts, and now those are being taken to pay for the new stadium, and I don't understand exactly how legally that works out. That's something that's voted on, millages can be taken out.
Okay, so I miss chalkboards, but I'm going to try using this whiteboard here. So let's say you have 18. You have a millage of 18, which is 0.1018 of the property value, and then that is dedicated to schools, right? And then you have another one that's 10, and that's dedicated to parks in Wayne County. So then you have this district, the stadium district, and it is earning X in taxes right now, without any improvement. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. There's lots of improvement there, but without the stadium and all the demolition related to that and the subsequent development that's going to happen around the stadium, it is earning this much in taxes. Well, now, and let's say that is, if this is this is time and this is money. So today, it's earning that much. And so these proportions of that dollar amount are going directly to schools and to parks, right? Now over time, it's projected to go like this. The classic up and to the right. That always seems to make people happy, the graph is going up and to the right. So it's more over time, more and more taxes are coming in. So, but this millage is a percent, right? So that money that would be going for these things is going up, right? In theory, because of that improvement. However, because of the tax increment financing, it is not going up.
Right, it's capped.
Because all of this extra tax money is going for, let's say there's $300 million that's being put into, that's being borrowed today and will be paid off by this money over time. So even though it is not a decrease in the amount of money for parks and schools, in theory, it might be if this money isn't earned enough to pay this debt. But it's flat. That money would have gone. And just because the predicted increase is that slope with the stadium, it still would have been an increase over time. So the reality of keeping it flat is actually a cut. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? So without the stadium, it would have still gone, maybe something like that. Even if you just fix up the buildings that were on the lots now, I mean, it's close to downtown, it's gonna get redeveloped, whether it's a stadium or not. So in fact, it is a cut. But on paper, it looks like it's flat. And it could be even a more severe cut if the increase that was projected when they decided this was how much money they could borrow wasn't met. So it could be a triple whammy. It's at least a double whammy from the start, because you're capping this value of property for the next 30 years in terms of its taxable value to the city and school district.
And if that project also got tax abatement and achieved value on the land, then would that add to what has to be paid back, or it's just a negative in terms of if that wasn't done, then that property would be added?
Well, any tax rate, it's funny, I'm gonna go ask for a property tax rate for housing cooperatives in Lansing. But I'm still gonna say this, any tax break that gets offered means everybody that didn't get it pays more. Because the amount of money that it costs of things doesn't go away because you cut taxes for somebody. You're just spreading it thicker on everybody else. I mean, that's the way to think about tax cuts or abatements. And so somebody better be, if you're giving a tax cut to a company to come in, they better be delivering some real value, or it's not worth it.
Most of it is corporate welfare.
Yeah, and there's proposals being thrown up right now in Lansing for more of it. Income tax rebates for new employees.
About the brownfield and stuff, that's crazy.
Yeah.
In the budgeting process, is there some place, I understand that all of these departments that exist and have staff and fulfill functions that already exist, they are gonna put their proposals forward. Well, what about new projects? And is there some place in the budget that there has to be mission statements, like we want to green our cities, or this is our plan, or, and then there's a whole new budget proposal on that. Like, where does some of this stuff come from? I don't think that it's reflected in this budgets we've looked at. Well, I think there's, for instance, solid waste services is still a department, even though recycling is now part of it. And in fact, they're losing money on recycling, which is why they chose a high cost to get a bin for curbside recycling. It's really, is the goal to divert stuff from the landfill, or is the goal to, make money from delivering a service that people perceive they want? That is a new thing, and it was basically funded by a fee on everybody who wants to have any recycling picked up curbside. And the reason that fee is high, again, compared to other cities, it's triple what it is in Austin for having to get a bin. But the fact is that the ability to make money from recycled materials has actually diminished as more and more cities are doing this, and unless it's all sorted carefully, it's tricky to make money from recycling. But that's a new thing, but it was lumped into an existing department. And
I only use that because you said kind of greening. But there could be, you know, it's even trickier with utilities. Like if you want to increase energy efficiency, like for instance, putting LED bulbs in all the streetlights. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because you use less electricity, they last longer than the other bulbs. Well, DTE turned right around and said, well, you know what? If we're not going to be able to make all the money from electricity, we're going to do a surcharge on cities that have LED bulbs. Now, it just so happened that that was rejected by the Public Service Commission, but only because there was a huge hue and cry over all these people who borrowed money. You know, they said, well, we're going to save this much money on lighting, so we're going to borrow the money to put the LED lights in. And then DTE, as an investment-owned utility, which frankly there's a lot of pension money in because it's a guaranteed profit. But investor-owned utilities are guaranteed to make 14% profit. So whatever savings you're going to get for one person, everybody else is paying it. It's almost like a tax cut. This is an argument for, you know, municipal utilities, although it's almost impossible to switch out of an investor-owned utility area. But a lot of municipal utilities in the 80s and 90s sold to investor-owned utilities because they considered it to be more efficient and are paying dearly for that today. So, but anyway, there can be other new initiatives. Often a mayor might reorganize and combine departments. That even happens at the federal level. You know, Jimmy Carter created the Energy Department, and also created the National Cooperative Bank. And Ronald Reagan came in and defunded the Energy Department and got rid of the National Co-op Bank. And I think that can certainly that can be a way to save money, is consolidate departments. But I think that if you're talking about laying people off, then, you know, there's a political consequence to that too. And it's serious here.
I was curious about what happened in Los Angeles when you said the judge just gave them $1. What was the conspiracy?
It was a conspiracy to destroy the public transportation system in Los Angeles. There used to be trolleys that ran all over the city of Los Angeles, and every piece of rail was pulled up.
It was like that here too. GM did that here.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, who brought the suit?
I think it was a coalition of people led by ACLU.
Okay.
And it was GM
That's an idea.
It was I think it was Firestone and Chevron. Yeah.
Just making another comment. I was at a city council meeting about nearly 2 weeks ago, and a number of people there who are retired city workers.
I was there.
Yeah, I saw you testify. I saw a bunch of you testify. So, well, that's why I was there. I was asked to come and support. So that's for you guys to make your testimony. Yeah, but a number of people, especially the city workers, they were mad about the $36 million allotment to the stadium, because for one thing, they felt like, no one ever asked us, did we want a stadium, and then they felt like, well, why are we taxpayers being asked to foot the bill for the stadium, and our health care is getting cut, our pensions are getting cut, we're not really seeing any long-term benefits from this, but yet we're being asked to put the bill for it. And actually, the Detroit Metro Times had done a story on the stadium about a year ago, and they broke it down to the point that they broke it down where they basically said, hey, there's no way out of it. Us, the taxpayers, are going to wind up paying for this, regardless of all the tax abatements and everything like that. But yeah, people were mad because they feel like, hey, does the community benefits agreement even apply to this? Because it doesn't seem like it is. It's not directly benefiting the community in any way that they are united, basically.
Well, I think that in some ways it's an argument about who's the community. And I think that in some ways the community is who shows up. So I think it's important to show up. And then you have a shot to be able to move the needle in the direction you think it should be moved. And I guarantee you the investors in that stadium, they showed up big time. They're probably on our list of people who gave 10,000 or more to the Detroit economic growth, and they're in with the chamber. And so they have kind of multiple attacks. And I think as a citizen, you can similarly organize, like an association of former employees. And there might be other neighborhood associations that you can bring out. The more organizations that represent groups of people that you can bring to the fore, the stronger your argument is. Because I think showing up as one person, especially, and also the clarity of your statement. So one person showing up and being angry and being really angry, incoherent, that's maybe even solidifies the position of the people that are there. But one person being cogent, delivering a succinct message with a specific ask, representing a group of people, that is going to move the needle. And the more of them and the more groups of people that can be represented in those arguments, I think the stronger the ability to change things. And it's incremental. So it's not like you're going to get an about face, but you're going to get some difference. And the next time you show up, you're going to get listened to in a way earlier on than just when you showed up at the last second or whatever the circumstances are. I mean, it is practice, and it is showing up over and over, and it's organizing so that you have a group, really a group of groups of people that are working together to make things different, better.
Yeah, I mentioned that because I'm an activist group that does that. What you said, you always encourage people, hey, you feel something's not going right in your neighborhood, you feel you're not being served by powers that be in your district, you know, show up at the community forums, pressure them, you know, show up to let them know that they are going to be held accountable to you, the taxpayer, for that. So we always encourage them, push them, and we have seen that change can come from that. It's not overnight, it's not the next day or anything, it happens a steady amount of time. It might take years before it happens, but it happens because you get out there and you show up and you, the quote, that saying, I know it sounds cliche, but you become the change you want to see in the world, so to speak, or in Detroit anyway.
So on that note, I would like to invite anyone who would like to plug organizations that they're with or that they would encourage us to get involved with to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
I'd like to piggyback on what she just said, though.
Okay, yeah, do it.
A comment. What she really said, bring it on down, was the greasy wheel gets the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know, that's a very easy way of interpreting it. It's an old adage. Squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, the person who makes the loudest noise gets the attention, I guess, something like that, I guess. But yeah, I'm with a group called Moratorium Now. That's what we do. You can look on our website, find out what our meetings are, so and all that.
What's it called?
Moratorium Now.
Moratorium Now.
Yeah, we have a website. You just go there. We have meetings every Monday down the street here at 5920 2nd Avenue. And Mr. Davis here, he's with a group called DOREA. Some of their members come to our meetings.
Right, Detroit Active Retired Employee Association.
And they have meetings too, once a month, on Wednesdays at the St. Matthew St. Joseph's Church, north on Woodward here, so. But yeah, we're at 5920 2nd Avenue, Antoinette 2nd, just, down the street here, 2 blocks down, I'm sorry.
And what's the issue for Moratorium Now that you guys are organizing about?
We're taking on a lot of issues, but right now, main issue is to save people's homes from tax foreclosure.
Tax foreclosures,
That's a
water
big issue now,
shutoffs,
so,
things of
yeah.
that nature.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I remember that too.
Yeah, if any issue you need someone to have protest for or help with, we can usually help with it, so. Yeah, we have meetings every Monday at 7, twice a month on Saturdays at 5, and we have food with that too, so. So it entices you to come.
All right. Anyone else?
I was just gonna say, I'll share one from the past, which I think Deanne gets the credit for doing the waterfront, but so many people fought the casinos on the riverfront. I mean, there were a lot of the same people fighting the casinos altogether, but, the fact that the riverfront was saved and, you know, luckily GM had money to spend. But, you know, if people hadn't fought that, we'd have ugly casinos with no windows on the riverfront.
One of the person here who attended the film last night, about, line 5, the, pipeline, the tar sand oil pipeline that is running under the Straits of Michigan, and the efforts, of groups there to, have it taken out, have it shut down. And, there was some really interesting information in terms of the state's, percentage of any kind of return on allowing Canadian tar sands oil to be put underneath, the Great Lakes, so close to Michigan, and by a private company and then transported back into Canada for them to ship all over the world. We maybe get 5% of the 30% that the shipper gets, if that. Enbridge employs 200 people. The Grand Hotel alone in the summer employs 700 people. I mean, I have statistics about the damage that would be done to that area if there were an oil spill, and especially in the winter if it was under the ice. I mean, there's no way they could ever fix it. It would never be the same. So I have some cards here postcards to send to Governor Snyder and Attorney General Schuette. There are also public comment cards. The public comment period is coming to an end August 4th. So, you know, if you care about your Great Lakes, I mean, I myself have never been to the Straits of Mackinac. I think the farthest I've ever been is to Prominence Falls. But I've seen fabulous pictures. If you had a chance to see the movie, they show the Kalamazoo River oil spillage, and it's absolutely devastating. And to just put that as juxtaposition to the beautiful properties up north on the lakes is just to imagine that kind of devastation. It would basically ruin our state. So I urge all of you to get some information, and I mean, if you want some of what I have here, that would be great. But I can also give you some groups that you can contact, go on their websites to get further information. But I think as you know, Michigan residents is something that we all need to get behind. I know that we live in Detroit. They were here last night, you know, asking for our help. So you know, we ourselves enjoy our waterfront, and I think that we understand how precious that property is and that lakefront is.
Following up on that, I was there with Mackenzie at that presentation. So we had people from Kent County up north there, and they made the effort to come down here. But they also realized that the presentation was missing something, and it had that local engagement that was missing, which actually Mackenzie and I were both part of. Back in 2013, we had Petco along the riverfront, and it took 6 months of going through city council sessions and meeting with them about the public health and safety issue before we got a resolution out of city council. The resolution the mayor chose to ignore for a good solid month. It took citizen engagement on the front line with the police coming out saying, why are you blockading a truck from going into the facility? We said, you might want to go check the mayor, why he hasn't shut down this illegal dumping site. We got the shutdown, and we got it so fast that those that were there last night for the presentation said that they've never seen any municipality move that fast on it. Now, Detroit's decision to shut that down rippled all the way downriver. Every community down the riverfront has said, no, we don't want that stuff here. So we did that through the Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands, and My Cats is busy with the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands is busy with what's going on around Line 5. I'm part of some other organizations here in Detroit. I do a lot of work around transit justice, so I know people like Moses, but also Transit Riders United. There's also food justice issues. There's the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, which everybody should know about.
They're doing a membership drive for their food co-op right now.
Yes. Food justice in the city of Detroit is a very real issue. Sovereignty in our food system means that we don't get fed junk. And there's far too much junk thrown into the grocery stores and the corner stores around the city of Detroit right now. And when the state of Michigan says they want to infuse more dollars into grocery stores, they need to realize that it has to be some constricting guidelines as to how that looks for a community to actually be engaged in restoring justice to that community.
Anybody else want to mention organizations they're involved in?
Well, I'm also the president of the Detroit Chapter National Action Network.
And what does National Action Network do?
We are an advocate for various communities within Metro Detroit. It's a social justice organization. We point out injustice and raise profile of different concerns. I'm also a candidate for the Detroit Police Commissioner for District 7. Detroit.
All right. And what's your name?
William M. Davis.
I remember meeting you at the Wright Museum when we were organizing that protest around closing the schools. Anybody else?
I'm with a group, another group called Detroit Eviction Defense. They have meetings every Thursday at 6 o'clock at St. John's Church on Gresham Russell. It's right across from Eastern Market. And they're kind of like an offshoot, well, no, they are an offshoot of moratorium now. Their whole entire focus is saving people from home foreclosures. So if you know anybody that's having an issue with getting your home back from foreclosure, you definitely go to them. Like I said, they have meetings every Thursday at 6 o'clock. So at St. John's Church, Gresham Russell. Sorry. And they have a website too, so.
Thank you.
Oh, that's it, sorry.
I'm a member of Solidarity in Highland Park, and Solidarity was formed in 2011 after DTE repossessed the streetlights in Highland Park because, well, you see, DTE when they actually own the pole, they charge about 10 times more for the rental of that pole than they do for the electricity that's going through the wire. And Highland Park had these rented poles that were like from the 1930s. They were long depreciated. But so Highland Park ended up with a $4 million bill to DTE that they couldn't pay because, as we all know, the population of Highland Park has declined pretty steeply. And it's a small town now, where once it was a fairly large city. Of course, the taxes couldn't pay for this bill, and so DTE physically repossessed the streetlights, which were made of like 25-foot cast iron poles that were like this thick. And some people say they sold it for scrap, who knows. So Solidarity puts solar streetlights up in Highland Park. There are now 6 streetlights, and they also, they have...
like on Hamilton or Woodward or West Street?
Not Hamilton and Woodward, because there are still 400 DTE-owned streetlights in Highland Park. And I think they even might have switched the light bulbs from the old mercury vapor to the LEDs, which would save the city a little bit of money. This is more in the neighborhoods. If you drive between like Hamilton and Woodward on any street at night, it is so dark, especially with those trees over. There's no starlight, no moonlight. And so Solidarity tries to find the darkest spots and put a solar street light in those places. And also they have a buying club. So people not only in Highland Park, but people all over Detroit can do bulk purchasing of solar driveway lights and like, you know, a light for your home, for your back alley, that kind of thing.
Have any cars?
Pardon?
How do you get in touch with you? Is there a website?
Oh, yeah, Solidarity has a website.
You have business cards too?
I have my business card, not Solidarity's, but.
Here, I can pull that.
Yeah, let's pull up Solidarity. It's spelled S-O-U-L. That's when you, so if you're looking them up on the internet, remember to spell Solidarity with an S-O-U-L, okay? And that's how you'll find them.
So,
I must not have
Just
spelled
put
it.
down there. You got your link right in the bottom.
Okay, spell it again.
It's right down there in the middle of the screen.
A-R-I-D, wait, yeah, D, I'm sorry, S-O-U-L-A-R-D-A-R-I-T-Y.
So we can purchase lights and help the cause?
Yeah, that deal is open right now.
Okay.
Personal, and it'll help the organization as a whole.
Like how much is each light?
It depends. They've got a solar generator they're selling now, as well as some wall-mounted lights. We got one for our driveway. What was it? It was
129.
yeah, 129, and that's installed. And it should last 10 years or more. It's got the battery built in and the solar's built in. So, you know, if it's on the south side, obviously it's going to get more sun than if it's on the north side.
There's a Michigan tax credit that you get if you work through all that too. With Solidarity, I'll show you how to get your tax credit.
I didn't even
So
know
this
that.
this Power Up is the program for the bulk purchase. So this is what they've got. So they've got different model options depending on how much light you need, and then the price is different. And that would include, and if you're a member, you get a discount. But you don't have to be a member. I mean, they want to get these solar things out to people. But they want members too. I mean, they're a member-controlled organization.
And they're not a co-op, but they are as close to as a co-op as you can be as a nonprofit. A completely democratic organization.
Anybody else?
Yes, I'm with the Detroit Independent Freedom School Movement.
Yep.
And we took a proactive movement when the state started to close schools down and tear the school buildings down. And so we took a model from the 1960s where we provide free education, free tutoring, and free educational services at various locations around the city, any church, any building, any, we started to go to some homes now. But anywhere we can hold a classroom or do some tutoring or teaching. We have ex-professors, mathematicians, writers, and what have you. We just finished a garden project, by the way, for the food security network. And so we like to go to churches, and we approach the church and we say, we want to come in while you are here. You know, because the churches say, well, we got expenses, you know, we don't want to run up our expenses or whatever. So while you're doing your Bible study or your choir rehearsal or whatever reason you're open, we'll come in and do tutoring. So right now we're in about 4 different locations. The main one right now is Charles Wright Museum every Saturday from 9:30 to about 12. Clinton, Puritan Avenue Baptist Church, which is over on Conant. We have class there for teenagers on Tuesdays, Wednesdays. And Shrine of the Black Madonna on Linwood, we have a Saturday class there. And there's a couple more that might be eluding me right now, but we're looking to expand. So if you have a church or any organization, we can bring in some children and children and adults, by the way. We can come in and do some tutoring. No, I don't have cars. I just went over the last minute to come and join you beautiful people here.
Donovan now. And so we have meetings every Monday at Red Door, Cass Commons, right there on Forest and
Cass.
At 7 o'clock. So everybody's welcome to come to that meeting. And then on Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock, the Child's Right Museum, we have a political education and political outreach meeting, so we can get involved in more organizations. So that's Saturdays at 10 and Mondays at 7. We won't be there this Saturday, however, we're going on a field trip somewhere. This Saturday we're going on a field trip.
All right.
But we'll be back next week. So it's working out pretty well, and looking to spread to other cities.
Highland Park would be a good city to spread to, since
Yes.
it's not there now.
Yeah.
Yes, we spoke to the Highland Park City Council, and they said they were interested in every show.
I went to the old Highland Park when Highland Park High School and Community College was attached.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful
man, what a
building.
travesty.
Mhm.
Snyder.
Anybody else want to plug an organization? All right, well, I'll just say thank you to Deal for organizing these series of events. I think that having the knowledge about how things work and having access to how the law works. I mean, this is just one of the many presentations how the legislature works. That this kind of opportunity for learning and getting together, meeting other people, is really valuable. And I thank them very much for inviting me to come talk as a new person to the area. So it's great to hear about what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.